Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest today is Professor Marandi. You've seen him here before. He is a professor at the University of Tehran. Welcome back, Professor Marandi.
Thank you very much for having me, Sabrina. Always a pleasure.
So a lot has happened since Donald Trump has resumed office. In particular, this past week has been rather chaotic under the Trump administration in the Middle East. And I want to start with the Houthis. It appears that obviously Donald Trump did implement an attack on the Houthis. There was a strong statement that came from him. There were some lies in that statement that the Houthis was still attacking U.S. ships, which at that point the Houthis were not. They were occupying that area, but there's a reason behind that. And I want to get into a little bit more of this attack and why the Houthis are there. So, number one, what is Donald Trump's goal here? Like, why would he think this is a good idea to attack Yemen? Obviously, there were a number of civilians that were killed, including children. What is his goal here, and why are the Houthis there?
Well, the Houthis, first of all, it's a very large tribe, and the name Houthis is misleading. It's called they are Ansarullah. The movement is called Ansarullah, and it goes far beyond the tribe. So the members of the Ansarullah movement uh, live across Yemen, and many of they have supporters now, especially after the last year and a half. They have supporters across the world. So it's much bigger than the Houthi tribe. But in the West, they call them the Houthis, but I'll just refer to them as Ansarullah. So Ansarullah is much more broad based, and they're the ones who are, along with their allies, who are in charge of the government. They've been in control of the capital for 10 years. Around 80% of the population of Yemen lives in areas that are under their control, and they are the government. So it's not as if they're some pirates, as uh, Trump likes to describe them as, or uh, lawless figures who are just stealing, or they're a government. But they are fiercely independent. But in the case of the genocide in Gaza, when it began, they said that they're going to implement the Genocide Convention. And they blocked the Red Sea to ships that were going to or from Israeli regime ports. And that's when the conflict began. The United States and the British, in order to facilitate is Israeli ships or ships affiliated to the regime, they started bombing, especially the Americans. I mean, the British are just a sidekick, but uh, they started bombing Yemen extensively for the period in which the genocide was being carried out. Then, when the ceasefire happened, when uh, literally the day before Trump took office, Ansarullah halted the strikes, and it said it will abide by the ceasefire. So shipping, as you were alluding to, became normal. There was no conflict. The Red Sea was business as usual until the Israeli regime, about 16, 17 days ago, maybe 18 days ago, they imposed a starvation siege on Gaza. They halted all aid from getting in: food, water, medicine, everything. For a few days, we saw nothing happen. It wasn't even reported widely in the Western media. And Western governments, of course, were completely indifferent. The United States, which was the guarantor to the ceasefire, completely indifferent. So after a few days, Ansarullah stated, or the Houthis, as they say, um, stated that they will reimpose the blockade until the Israeli regime stops the starvation siege. You would think that any civilized person would look at this with in a very positive light. They would support this. In order to stop starvation, they're going to block ships destined to the ports of the Israeli regime or ships that are leaving. They didn't do it immediately. They said that they gave, I think, the Israeli regime 4 days. The regime did nothing. They continued to continue. They continued with the siege, and then they reimposed the siege. And they said they will keep the siege in place until they allow aid to get into Gaza. We live in a dystopia, it seems, Sabrina. So instead of praising Yemen, the Americans and the British go and bomb Yemen. That's what Trump did. And we saw that women and children were murdered, and they really did no damage to Ansarullah, because Ansarullah has, for the last 10 years, they've been bombed. For 7 years, the Americans under Obama and Trump, and I think the start of the Biden White House, they were bombing, the Saudis and the Emiratis were bombing Yemen day and night, and the Americans and the Europeans were helping them, and the Americans were imposing a starvation siege in the Red Sea so that even food couldn't get into Yemen. But they survived, and they built all of their military infrastructure deep underground. And that's why when Biden started to bomb them a year and a half ago, when they began this siege, it had no impact. And throughout the last year and a half, whenever they wanted to strike a ship, they did, until the ceasefire, of course. And now we saw that after the Americans bombed, that had no impact on their military capabilities. They went and responded, and they also fired a missile at the Israeli regime. And they said they're going to continue this until the siege ends, the siege on Gaza. So this is where things are. Now, Trump, of course, threatened them, and he threatened Iran too. But we've just seen that Trump gave he wrote another statement where he said Iran has significantly decreased its aid, something like that, which I think it shows that he's backing down, because his previous rant was only 2 days ago. And how can Iran decrease aid to Yemen in like 48 hours? That's not possible. So I think it's clear that he's figured out that this was not very smart, and that this is a dead end. I'm guessing, of course, it's Trump. Maybe tomorrow he'll write something different and he'll say something very strange again. But in any case, Trump has, I think, made a huge mistake for a couple of reasons. One is that he's committed crimes against humanity, and then in addition to that, he greenlighted Netanyahu's genocidal attack, which was very horrific, and well over 400 people were killed, and almost half of them kids and infants. He destroyed any little bit of soft power that he was able to create for himself. Because when he was being elected, when he was standing for election, he sort of presented himself as the peacemaker. And some of our mutual friends, like Scott Ritter, were hoping that maybe he would be a peacemaker. And I'm not criticizing him. I didn't think this would happen, but I'm not criticizing him. It's like if it's Biden or if it's Harris, they would be still killing the Palestinians and slaughtering Palestinians. So maybe there's a small chance that Trump would behave differently. That's how some people calculated things, and that's why some people voted for him. I'm not saying everyone, but in any case, Trump was able to create a bit of soft power for himself, but he destroyed it. He's shown himself to be as sinister as Biden. He's a child killer. He's responsible for the deaths of kids in Gaza in Yemen, and that's not something that can ever be erased. He's carried out murder. So he's hurt himself, but also I'm quite confident that at the end of the day he will not be able to defeat Yemen, Ansarullah, and then all of his statements are going to come back to, well, I can't say haunt him because he's the sort of person who'll say, when did I say that? I think a few days ago he called Zelensky a dictator, and then a couple of days later someone asked him about it. He said, "Me?" So it's Trump, but I think I think at the end of the day, we'll see that Ansarullah will prevail. But in any case, but this is a big mistake because a few people or a segment of society that were hoping that he'd be a peacemaker, they no longer believe that. That's damaging to Trump, and I think many young Americans and many people across the world are outraged at what he did. Remember, the United States has destroyed its soft power. I mean, the last year and a half has demolished the United States and Europe. No one believes that they are the free world or the civilized world or anything like that. If the elites in the West are not worse than everyone else, they're certainly no better, and they're probably a lot worse. But when Obama was elected, he was able to create a great deal of he was able to rebuild American soft power because it was right after Bush, and we had the Iraq War and the catastrophe in Iraq, and and then you had the financial crisis in the United States, and then it was McCain against Obama, and then when Obama won as an African American, as a let's say outsider, not that he was, but anyway, there was a great deal of hope that this will be a new America. And the United States has moved beyond race. It's a post-race society, and all these things that you know better than me. And across the world, he created that image. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing, basically, which I'd love to do. I just love to sit here and get some PhD degree in some new field of study, but it's not going to happen. And that was very important because the United States had become very unpopular. People despised Bush and were outraged at what happened in Iraq across the world and many in the United States. So Biden was sort of able to revive American soft power, but then he destroyed it as well. He destroyed it by destroying the dirty war in Syria, by destroying Libya, by supporting the genocidal war in Yemen that I discussed earlier, and so on. And of course, he didn't do any good for Americans, especially African Americans, minorities, the poor. And Obama, like the presidents before him, they are the ones who created Trump. Trump is the result of his policies and the policies of presidents before him. But for a period of time, he was able to revive this facade or this image of America being, the beacon of freedom and democracy and whatever. Trump wasn't able to do nearly as much as Obama in that sense. I mean, Trump was able to create this hope among some that maybe he's going to be different this time. Maybe he'll be a peacemaker, but that's gone. And I think that is going to hurt him.
Yeah, I think that and I know some people that thought that he was going to be that person. I forget that sometimes, he did visit Dearborn, Michigan, and some people may not be aware of this, but some of the people that did support him going into the 2024 election from Dearborn were Yemeni Americans. And I don't know if everyone realizes that, there's a large Arab American community in Dearborn, Michigan, and some of them are from, originally from Yemen. And look at who he attacks, right? Look at who is being killed again. So I think that's
And
important for
why?
people.
Just because they were saying that the starvation siege must come
No.
to an end.
Exactly. And then Western media is obviously not explaining that part or any bit of what you just explained there. They're not getting into that. They are basically saying that they were attacking all of these ships, and so the U.S. government decided to respond. They're not mentioning that there was no blockade from that certain period, but yet Trump said that there was. So it's another one of those things that has not been fact checked. What's particularly interesting about Yemen, and we talked about Yemen a couple of years ago, Saudi Arabia received those weapons from the United States to attack Yemen. And about a year ago, Bernie Sanders was introducing a piece of legislation to the Senate to stop the U.S. involvement in Yemen. And apparently, from what I read, after having conversations with Joe Biden, he decided not to bring that legislation to the floor. I guess Biden told him it's not going to pass and it's going to look bad on the United States or whatever, et cetera. I don't know. But that was another example of Bernie Sanders choosing to back down when he should not have. And I showed pictures on the show of just how horrible Yemen looked after all these attacks and what people were really living in and what's happening there. And I think that after October 7th, that kind of fell to the wayside and there was more attention on Gaza and Israel, obviously. But they did respond, right? They did respond. They attacked the USS Truman and they issued a statement and they said that this is in response to the attack that came from the US on to us that killed like our people. And what I think a lot of Americans don't understand, especially if they're just watching corporate media, is that that was retaliatory, right? Like it's just a lot of these things are omitted. And it's the same framing that we hear that Israel is only going after Hamas, which we all know from the images that we've seen. That's obviously not the case. They haven't destroyed Hamas. They're not going to be able to destroy Hamas, in my opinion. But I think that what people have to understand is that we're so quick to point fingers and just agree with the propaganda that this is a bad organization, this is a bad group because this is what they did. And we don't look any further into the research. Do you think that Donald Trump gets it now that this was a horrible idea to attack Yemen?
I'm sure that Trump knows why Ansarullah did this. And as you pointed out, there was no they weren't blocking any ships. They only began blocking ships linked to Israeli ports a few days ago to stop the siege. So other ships were passing through the Red Sea, and they had not yet struck an Israeli ship. They just said that if they try to pass through the Red Sea, they will prevent it, either by uh, striking it or by giving it a warning to go back. So uh, shipping was being carried out, as usual, and only when the Americans, as you rightly pointed out, attacked Yemen and killed people in Yemen did they respond. And this, I think, is also an important point. Trump basically said, he tried to intimidate them and warned them not to strike back, and they did. And he warned Iran that if Yemen strikes back, that Iran will be punished. Which I think this is an important point to discuss too. First of all, the United States, in its rhetoric and in its the narrative that the Western media produces, because the mainstream media and the state and the political order, they're one and the same for the most part. There are differences, of course, on certain issues, but when it comes to global domination and U.S. hegemony, and especially in our region or Latin America or Africa, they're all one and the same. So um, Trump, when he said that Yemen must must refrain from attacking and then threatened Iran. Basically, he was playing into this narrative that Yemen is an Iranian proxy, and that's nonsense. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, Islamic Jihad in Palestine, the secular groups in Palestine that Iran is funding as well, and the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Front. All of these are Iranian allies. None of them are proxies. Iran does not dictate to any of them what to do. It supports them. And Yemen, therefore, has agency. Iran supports them. Iran aids them. Iran doesn't hide that. Iran says we support Ansarullah, we support Hamas, we support Islamic Jihad, we support Hezbollah, and we support all the other resistance groups. It doesn't hide that. But Iran doesn't dictate terms to any of them. In fact, the reason why the relationship between these different entities is so strong is because it is an alliance of equals rather than some top to bottom relationship. And the evidence, I think, is clear. The very fact that the Saudis and the Emiratis spent hundreds of billions of dollars, literally hundreds of billions of dollars, in their genocidal war in Yemen with Western support and backing, complete Western support and backing, but failed because they spent huge amounts of money creating these mercenary armies and trying to bribe different tribes to turn against Ansarullah, and of course bombing it day and night. And of course they're neighbors. The Saudis can far more easily bomb Yemen than can the Americans. The Americans have to bring in an aircraft carrier from across the world. Then it has to, now since Yemen is striking at them, they move their aircraft carrier and other ships to the very north of the Red Sea. So every time they want to strike, they have to travel all the way down to the south of the Red Sea. It's very expensive for the Americans. They're paying a lot of money for this operation. But for the Saudis, they had endless money, and it was much easier because they're neighbors. The Saudis failed. And during the 7-year genocidal war, and the Americans were imposing the starvation siege in the Red Sea to help the Saudis, just like what we see in Gaza. But back then, very few people were sympathetic to Yemen and Ansarullah. And the reason is that not only was the corporate media supporting the Saudis and the Emiratis, but also the Arabic media was supporting them. Qatar, Turkey, they were all supporting the Saudis. Only when Saudi Arabia and the Emirates turned against Qatar a couple of years later, and the divide grew, did Al Jazeera's position on Yemen evolve. Otherwise, at the beginning, they were supportive. So Yemen was very much alone. Both the narrative was against them. They were poor, they were impoverished, they were being attacked, but they held their ground. They never lost the capital. They never lost the capital. Why? Because they're a popular movement. If they were just a proxy, if they were mercenaries, it would have been finished. It was a 7-year genocidal war would have been finished after a few weeks. But the fact that the West and its regional allies like Saudi Arabia couldn't get anywhere with them shows that they had popular support. And so Trump is miscalculating, and I think that he probably knows that they were not attacking ships in the Red Sea and why they decided to stop Israeli ships. He probably knew that. I'm guessing if he's not being told that, then I think the United States is in real trouble. But I think that in his arrogance, he thought that if he bombed Yemen, he'll bomb it differently than Biden. His bombs are somehow more potent and more destructive. They're Trump's bombs, I guess. I don't know. But the fact is that he doesn't have anything up his sleeve that Biden didn't have. It's the same U.S. Navy. It's the same U.S. Jets. It's the same U.S. But there's nothing new that he can use that would change the equation. Yemen's assets are all deep underground. Their radar and missile and drone capabilities are very mobile. They're mobile. They come out, they strike, they go back underground. They're spread out across the country. They control the country. It's a large piece of land. It's very mountainous. It's easy tied. They have decoys all over the place. They know how to fight this war because they've been fighting in the Saudi Air Force uh, and Biden, and it's been a decade. So they know how to do things, and it's not like Hezbollah. Hezbollah uh, fights at a disadvantage because they don't control the country. The capital is full of Western embassies. They're all carrying out espionage with the help of and other embassies are helping them too, not just the Japanese or the Koreans, but other global South weak countries that have embassies there. And then you have all those NGOs in Beirut that are well funded. Uh, and then you have these militias, these fascistic militias like the Lebanese forces, which in 1982, when the Israeli regime invaded Lebanon and took the capital, Beirut, this militia, elements within this militia alongside others, they went into a Palestinian camp called Sabra and Shatila, and they slaughtered 3,500 Palestinians and Lebanese Shias under Israeli supervision. The Israelis were helping them. They had surrounded the area and they went in and slaughtered these people. So these are the allies of the the Western embassies. And so Hezbollah has to watch its back. And the country is deeply infiltrated. It can get spied on. Anyone can travel anywhere in the country. But Yemen is controlled, the part where 80% of the people live, the livable part, almost all of the livable part of Yemen is controlled by Ansar Allah. So they control the country. It's very difficult for the Americans to infiltrate, to have people on the ground to figure out what they have. And it's a mountainous country, as I said. So Ansar Allah's capabilities are significant. They have advanced technology, and I'm sure that the Iranians are involved and they help them. But Yemen itself is a highly educated society. It has universities. It's a very sophisticated people, and the Iranians are helping them. The Americans are helping the Israelis carry out genocide. The Iranians are helping the people of Yemen to defend themselves. So there's nothing for the Americans to complain about. But Yemen makes its own decisions, and it has a very powerful and effective military defense capability, which is very inexpensive. So it's high-tech drones and high-tech missiles, but very cheap. So every time they fire a drone at an American ship, the Americans have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars downing that drone. Every time the Americans want to bomb the country, and they basically hit nothing of significance. I mean, all the infrastructure has been destroyed in the 10 years of genocidal air bombings, air campaigns that the Saudis and the Americans carried out. So what are they going to strike? Their military assets are underground. They're just going to kill ordinary people. So it's a very costly war for the Americans. Every time a drone is fired, the Americans have to spend a lot of money. This is not a war that the Americans can win unless Trump decides to carry out an invasion. If he wants to invade Yemen, he'll have to send in hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This is not the United States of the 1990s. They don't have the money. They don't have the power. They don't have the popular support. The only thing I can think of which could change things is a false flag operation inside the United States. You know, the Trump assassination, which they tried to attribute to Iran. That sort of nonsense, maybe someone would try to do, and someone would try to bring about some sort of change in U.S. policy. Other than that, I think it's just going to end in Trump's humiliation, and he'll probably probably after a few months or after a period of time, he'll recognize that he can't continue this.
It's also interesting too because he put out this threat against Iran. And I remember a number of us just went off about this when we saw it on social media. I'm like, is he insane? Like this threat that you mentioned that any attack from the Houthis would be considered as an attack from Iran. To me, I felt like this was Donald Trump trying to do the bidding of Israel because the Likud party does not want Iran there, right? So Benjamin Netanyahu has talked about this over and over. He's shown these pictures, these images that talks about the greater Israel. And I remember he described Iran as the curse, right? Like he doesn't want those entities there. So to me, it's just Donald Trump trying to speak for Israel. And honestly, in my opinion, I think trying to escalate a war with Iran, which I think is what Israel wants. Now, Israel, I think, knows that they obviously would not be able to beat Iran alone. So I feel like Israel is trying to get the US government to get involved with the war with Iran and to put US troops on the ground in Iran, which would be absolutely insane. And I think if you even talk to people that have been in the military, that have been in the Middle East, they'll let you know like it would be insane to go to war with Iran. But I really feel like this is the goal. This is what they want to happen. And Trump's going along with it. This is also not just APAC money, but also Miriam Adelson money. Also, when you look at Gaza, when he talks about this plan for Gaza and for it to be like Trump Gaza and just to take over and everything, like they really want a war with Iran. And I want you to explain to people why that would be incredibly dangerous.
There are a couple of things I think that it would be good to know. First of all, the Israeli regime obviously hates Iran more than any other entity in the region because it's Iran that's behind the resistance and the axis of resistance. It's Iran that supports it, and it's Iran that has made huge sacrifices. The sanctions, for example, these are because of Palestine. There's no other reason. The nuclear program or terrorism or human rights or global warming or whatever it is they blame Iran for on any particular day, it's all about Palestine. Everything else is just an excuse. The the Israelis, though, they know that I mean, all the other countries are either allies of the Israeli regime or they do business as usual. Erdogan, despite his rhetoric, he's throughout this genocide, he's been transporting very inexpensive oil from Central Asia and Azerbaijan, the Republic of Azerbaijan, to Israel. So he's literally been fueling the genocide, the war machine, the genocide. And he's also been some of the things that the Israelis needed that couldn't get through the Red Sea. His business people in Turkey have been providing it to Israel during this whole period of time. Jordan has been doing trade as usual. Egypt has been doing business as usual. The Emirates has very good relations with Israel too, and Saudi Arabia has been cooperating as well. So trade goes through Saudi Arabia to Jordan to Israel. So it's basically Iran and the resistance. So obviously the Israeli regime would like to see Iran disappear. Personally, I think that Trump probably doesn't want a war with, well, let's say that he probably doesn't want a war with Iran. And I would imagine that the US military itself doesn't want a war because they know what would happen. But I think there are very powerful forces that want war. The Zionist lobby and Adelson and all these other billionaires and wealthy Zionists, Christian Zionists, Jewish Zionists, secular Zionists, whoever, I think they're the neocons. A lot of them would like to see war because, as you rightly pointed out, the Israeli regime can't defeat Iran. They would lose. But if the Americans came into the battlefield, it would be very bloody. But there are, I think, a couple of things that have to be kept in mind. One is Trump. I think he has a number of reasons. Maybe I can think of three reasons why he's escalating now. One is that he has, I think this is the lesser reason. He has trouble at home, he has powerful enemies, and he would like to distract attention away from the problems that are mounting in the United States and elsewhere. The second, which is somewhat similar, but more important, I think it has to do more with Ukraine and Russia. Russia is going to win this war. And as we predicted, many of us at least predicted from the very beginning, Russia was going to win, and it's become clear as day that that's happening. This is not going to look good for Trump. And Trump's opponents are going to attack him and blame him for the defeat, even though it was inevitable. If Biden was still in power, the Ukrainians would lose. They wouldn't be better off or much better off than they are now. So Trump wants to, I think, revive relations with Russia, and that is also going to be very costly for him at home because his enemies will be at his throats, both for the defeat of Ukraine. No matter how the war ends, it's going to be a defeat. And for any rapprochement with Russia, the evil Russians, they're almost as evil as Iran. So that's pretty bad. He, I think, wants to see him show himself as strong somewhere else. And to a degree, I think this Canada business and this Panama Canal business and the Greenland business is also linked to this image creating, a strong Trump, a strong America. America under Trump is getting stronger. Bombing Yemen, sadly for some Americans, is traditionally presidents in the United States become popular when they start bombing countries. And if you recall, during his first term, when he first bombed Syria, many of his enemies praised him, and they said, finally, he's acting like a president. So they wanted him out, but they supported him as long as he was bombing Syria. So sadly, that is a fact. So I think that he's trying to show himself as strong, but also he needs the Zionist lobby on his side because he's going to be under a lot of attacks over Ukraine and Russia and what I was explaining. So I think part of this is to look strong and to have the support of the Zionist lobby, or at least parts of the Zionist lobby, so in order to deflect criticisms that are going to be or that are being directed at him because of the defeat in or the imminent defeat in Ukraine and his decision to change the relationship with Russia. I think this has a lot to do with it. And so I personally don't think he wants war. I think Netanyahu definitely wants war. I think Netanyahu, from the beginning of this situation on October the 7th, has been continuing the war for his own sake. The war has gone badly for the Israeli regime. The world has turned against it. There's nothing worse than that. They have had no success on the battlefield in Lebanon or in Gaza. Their economy has been harmed. Some people, a significant number of people have left the country. But I think the most important thing is that their image has been shattered, destroyed. And when people speak about Israel, they think about the Nazis and that sort of thing. So Israel, but Netanyahu has benefited. I think he's been a winner in these 18 months. Israel has been the biggest loser, but Netanyahu is a winner because he stayed in power, and he's been continuing the war in Gaza and then in Lebanon because that's how he stays in power. That's how he keeps his coalition together, so he can remain in power, so he doesn't go on trial. And his coalition, being the religious fanatics, they want the wars. If he was smart, if Israel was smart, sinister but smart, in my opinion, what they would have done is they would have bombed Gaza for 2 months in October, after October, and then said, okay, we've crushed Hamas and these barbarians, who rape and who behead kids. They've been punished, and now we'll have a ceasefire and we'll exchange prisoners. A lot of people would have sympathized with them, and they would have continued to believe the lies about the beheadings and the lies about the rapes. But they continued with the genocide. And that caused people across the world to start asking questions. The images wouldn't go away. They learned about the Nikba, people who had no idea. They just thought this was a fight about a piece of land. People began to wonder, figure out that, these people have been dispossessed. Some people from Europe came in and took their land and that sort of thing. So awareness, there was a great deal of awareness. And then they started figuring out that there's no evidence for any beheadings. There's no evidence out there for rapes. And I remember being on Piers Morgan's show, and he kept telling me about rapes and whatever. And I said, okay, where's the footage? Where's the evidence? And he just put, he was flustered, and he didn't have it. Everyone has, people have. Where's my cell phone? Everyone, oh, this my cell phones. Everyone has cell phones. All you have to do, Israel has cameras all over the place. It's, there are more cameras in Israel probably, except for in Singapore, than anywhere else in the world. But there is no evidence. So people began to figure out the truth, and but Netanyahu doesn't care about the Israeli regime. He cares about Netanyahu. So he went on, and then he went and expanded the war in Lebanon. And he would like to see a war with Iran. I think there's no doubt about that. But personally, I think that Trump probably understands that a war with Iran would be devastating. Because Iran, first of all, is much more powerful and much stronger than Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Vietnam combined. And Iran also is right beside the Persian Gulf. Half of the Persian Gulf, half of the coast belongs to Iran. That's why it's called the Persian Gulf. And all these oil and gas installations in the Persian Gulf, they're right in front of Iran. I mean, there are Iran's oil and gas installations, and there's those that belong to these tiny countries like Kuwait and Qatar and these other dots on the map, the Emirates. If there's war, and the United States has bases in these tiny countries, these family dictatorships, all these glass palaces and mansions would be shattered. All the oil and gas tankers would be destroyed. That would bring down the global economy. And it's not the Persian Gulf is not very wide. And Iran has hundreds of thousands of missiles and drones. I mean, everyone now acknowledges Iran's drone and missile power. That many have in the West, they used to ridicule Iran. But then now they're saying, the Iranians are helping the Russians win the war. A few years ago, in this sort of Orientalist worldview that the West has, every time Iran would speak about a military achievement and technology-wise, they said it's nonsense. They're just making it up. But now they're saying actually that the Iranians are helping the Russians, rightly or wrongly. So if there's a war, the oil and gas in this region, if there's no longer any more oil and gas, that would bring about an economic collapse worse than I think 1929. And that would be the end of Trump's presidency. That would be the end of the global economy as we know it. And then think about the implications. I mean, if people are moving from Latin America right now because of all the misery, partially because of all the misery that the Americans have imposed on Latin America, and if people are moving to Europe from North Africa and West Asia because of all the misery that the Europeans have imposed on this part of the world, imagine what happens if the global economy collapses. I mean, the Western economies would collapse, but people would be millions would be moving towards North America and Europe, even though they may not be any better off than anywhere else, but people will still be moving to where they think it's going to be better. So a war would be so catastrophic that I really can't envisage how the world would look like. And I think Trump knows that. There is a sort of balance of terror between Iran and the United States because of the fact that Iran has this capability and so much oil and gas and all these tankers and these installations and desalination plants and all these petrochemical plants and all these refineries are right in front of Iran. I think that Trump recognizes that it would be very stupid to start some sort of war with Iran.
Yeah, I totally hear you there. And then, of course, if we move forward, we see that obviously Israel broke that ceasefire, which I think many of us predicted was going to happen at some point. When Donald Trump said we got the ceasefire deal, right? Like when he
Sorry,
said,
Sabrina, just one thing. We always have to remember over the past couple of months since we've had this so-called ceasefire, just a very important footnote. On average, every day the Israelis were killing 3 Palestinians. On
that's right.
average, every day the Israelis were killing 1 Lebanese citizen during this whole period of time. And then they intensified the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. They kill people, but they're busy destroying homes and neighborhoods and different refugee camps in Jenin and elsewhere. So it's not as if there's been this ceasefire and now it's all quiet and people are thinking about how to build the country. And the Israelis have constantly been violating the ceasefire. They've been blocking. Before they imposed the starvation siege more than 2 weeks ago, in violation of the agreement, they've been preventing heavy machines from being taken into Gaza, or heavy equipment from being taken, the mobile homes from being taken into Gaza, the vehicles necessary to remove the rubble. All of that was being blocked. It was only food and, you know, medicines and that sort of thing that were being allowed to get into Gaza. So the ceasefire has only been a ceasefire in name, but killing 3 people in Gaza on average every day during the past couple of months, anywhere else in the world, that would be considered to be heavy fighting.
You're right. You're right. That's a good point. But when Trump announced that, it seemed like to me, a lot of people were surprised, but I think to me it seemed like it was more of a PR stunt, whereas like he wanted to get the good PR. So people can say, oh, look what he did. He did this. And now, there's going to be an exchange of hostages, etc. But people had to, in the back of my mind, Professor Marandi, people had to have known that Israel has broken ceasefires over and over and over and over again. And they had to have known that there's no way that he was just going to say, okay, ceasefire and let's just work together and make things good for the Palestinian people. I feel like people should have known better. They had to have known. But it seems like I'm noticing from the responses from people, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening again, especially when it was revealed on Fox News that Donald Trump gave the green light, to your point earlier, gave the green light for Netanyahu to go in and just indiscriminately start bombing people again. So we're talking about over 400 people dead. It's probably more than that, if we're not counting those that are under the rubble. Over 176 children, again, probably more than that. At
That
this
was the first day, and they've been killing ever since.
There you go. So it's to me, I'm shocked that so many people are surprised that this happened. There's been a couple of people that I've seen on social media saying this is not what I voted for. And in my mind, yes, it is, because I think there were many of us who made it very clear that both of these parties support Israel and support the assault that Israel has on Gaza and on the West Bank. And I just look back on that and I don't understand why people thought that maybe it would be different under Donald Trump. And here we are again, right? Where more children are being killed. What happens from here? And why do you think people bought into that? Why do you think some people believed, or in particular, the Arab American community that said they were going to support Donald Trump when he came to visit? Why do you think they bought into this?
Well, I understand why they would buy into it. I mean, I think if I was a voter in the United States, I wouldn't have voted for Trump. I would have, well, I would have voted for probably Jill Stein, even though her position on Syria, I think, is completely unacceptable. And I think that Iran's position on Syria, Hezbollah's position on Syria, has been vindicated. What happened in Syria, we know now. Um, uh, Even the new administration, their senior officials are admitting this. Tulsi Gabbard has said this in the Senate when she was during her confirmation hearing. She said that the United States was supporting Al Qaeda, something that we knew from the beginning. And ISIS, of course, is a used to be a part of Al Qaeda, same ideology, but they had split. They split over power, and the false flag operations about chemical weapons. I think that's also something that she was alluding to. We knew all that, but now everyone knows this. But and with the massacres that we've been seeing across Syria by these fanatics, these Takfiri terrorists, I think it's clear as day that those who are supporting the U.S. dirty war in Syria, not those who are insincere, but those who are sincere, they were fooled and they were being naive. Well, I mean, it's obvious that from 2011, what the United States was doing in Syria was was for the sake of Israel. What NATO was doing in Syria was for the sake of Israel. and using these horrible terrorists, this was the worst possible outcome, and that's why Iran and Hezbollah and others resisted against these groups back then. So, but still, I probably would have, despite her position on Syria, which I think was probably taken under some duress, under pressure, I would probably voted for her. But having said that, I do sort of understand the position that some people took when they voted for him, because it was like it's sort of like those old movies. I'm a lot older than you, but when I was a kid, there were these movies where they'd be in the desert and they'd see these uh, um, water in the desert, and they'd walk there, and it would turn out to be nothing more than a mirage. And I think it's that hope, that I don't know if you recall, uh, when Harris at one point she was speaking to a group of people, and this young man spoke about the genocide in Gaza, and they took him out, and she said he had a point or something like that, or he's right. And then people were really hopeful that this was some turning point, but nothing happened. She just said a sentence and then moved on and continued to take the position that she held from the beginning, which was identical to Biden. So people in their desperation, they sort of cling on to hope that maybe this guy is going to be different, and maybe he's going to move in a different direction. Again, I didn't believe it. If I was in the United States, I wouldn't have voted for Trump or Harris or Biden. But I do sort of understand why some people would think that way. And I do understand why some people, desperately hoping that Harris would do something, would pick up like a sentence here or a word there. And it's naive. It's mistaken. And I think it was clear that this was going to happen. But I understand why some people, seeing all these images, they know that someone like that some third party would never get into power, that any of these small parties have no chance in the world. Jill Stein, impossible. So they thought maybe this would be the lesser of two evils. Again, I wouldn't do it, but I sort of understand it. I do understand it, but I would have advised them not to do it anyway.
Final question for you, Professor Marandi. When you look at some of the other Arab countries in the region, a lot of us in the West that are not, pro-Israel and against what Israel is doing, we are asking the question, and we are wanting Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, more so primarily, to stand up to Israel. And I was thinking about the colonizer project. What I've explained to people is that from what I'm seeing, it appears that Israel is the final stage of colonialism in the world. And this idea of a greater colonialism, it's all a part of that plan. And what it appears to me has happened is that the West has managed to establish relationships with other Arab nations and pull them away from what I would say would be what's best for the region and Arab people in the region, to get them to back and support a state of white supremacy. And I don't mean necessarily white by skin color, because white supremacy doesn't necessarily mean you're white, right? But
Well,
I
not all,
feel
not all the Israeli Zionists are Ashkenazi.
right.
A large segment of the Zionists, they come from North Africa and West Asia. They come from Morocco. They come from Iraq. They're overwhelmingly, they're not indigenous to Palestine, but they're not white in that sense. But yes, it is a sort of white colony.
Right. And so it seems like they have managed to gather countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan. They've pulled them away from being able to protect and kind of really fight for their own people and their own benefit, and to focus on what's best for Israel. And I feel like, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, going back, would Egypt Do they wish maybe they would have made a different decision, seeing how Israel is, how this Zionist project has come to light? Does Jordan, do they look back and wonder, man, maybe we should have made a different decision? Maybe we shouldn't have become comrades with the West. Maybe we should have stood on our own so that we could effectively back the Palestinian people. Maybe we should have, and I don't know if they necessarily have that opinion or not, but it seems like to me the right thing for them to do would be to back and support the Palestinian people, and not support the West and this colonial project that is Israel. Is there any chance you think in the future that at some point maybe there will be some type of change with those particular countries?
I think it's inevitable. I personally believe that we're that Israel is a dying project. That Zionism is a dying project in Palestine. I'm not saying it's going to go away tomorrow, next week, or next month, or next year, but I think this is the beginning of the end. If a country like Turkey, if Erdogan broke off ties with Israel, just Erdogan, and stopped sending oil and stopped doing trade and actively supported the Palestinians alongside the Iranians, imagine how things different would be if Saudi Arabia took that stance. If just one of these key countries took a position like that of Iran, then the situation would be very different. But at the end of the day, Sabrina, I mean, in the sake of Turkey, it's a bit different. It's not a family dictatorship in the sense that you have in these Arab countries or military dictatorship. But Turkey Erdogan has his own problems, and I think he's trying to, he's NATO at the end of the day, and he's working with Israel, and he's trying to increase his sphere of influence, and at the same time do deals with Israel so that Israel and he can both increase their spheres of influence without impeding one another. That's how it's been so far, at least. I mean, it's quite outrageous. It's utterly outrageous that the sort of help that he's giving to Israel, and how he undermined Syria when it's obvious that it was a NATO project, and that he brought these criminals to power, regardless of what the previous government was. Iran never cared about the previous government. Iran didn't care if the previous president was a Druze or an Alawite or a Christian or a Jew but it was just that it was opposed to Israel, and that it was unlike the other, because all of the Arab regimes are dictatorships, almost all of them. It was just more independent of the West, and they were helping the Palestinians. So Iran and the West wanted to undermine it, and Iran knew why they wanted to undermine it. So what Turkey did, basically, by carrying out this dirty war on behalf of the United States and with the support of all these other countries and NATO countries, they weakened so much that helped the Israeli regime. That was basically what the Israelis wanted. The Israelis, too, were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda alongside the occupied Golan Heights. But imagine if Turkey had taken a different route. And you're right, imagine these other regimes had done the same. But these are all family dictatorships, and they're not popular, and they depend on the United States. And here I'm going to speculate a bit, but why do all these senators in the United States and why do all these congressmen and women clap like seals for Netanyahu when he goes to Congress? Is it the Epsteins of the world that partially get everyone on the same page? Is it corruption? Is it a combination of all these things? Is it money? Is it AIPAC? It's all these things. Well, I'm pretty sure that a lot these Arab dictatorships, all their families, they go to the West for education, for training. They have palaces there. They have the West. They're bound to the West. They're not popular, so the CIA and FBI and the British intelligence services, all of these agencies are helping them stay in power, and they probably have a lot of dirt on them, just like a lot of American politicians, you know, the Epsteins have. There's a host of reasons why they would be standing up against their own people. Otherwise, if they stood with their own people, they would become immensely more popular. If Erdogan actually took a stand against the Israeli regime, people would be behind him. If the king of Jordan actually took a stand, overnight he would become popular. But I think these people, well, these different people for different reasons, it's impossible, and they would never change. And they're totally bad. These are, the house slaves uh, of as Malcolm X would put it. These are the Orientalized Orientals. Uh, the the These are the brown sahibs, the West struck. There we have every part of the world has its own, its own way of saying it, its own way of putting it. But the comprador class, every part of the world has its own experience, but it's all the same. They are bound to the West. They're subordinate to the West. They mimic the West. And they can never change. But the more rage and anger that the Israeli regime creates, the more dangerous it becomes for it. Because all of these regimes that are in the American camp, or most of them at least, become more illegitimate in the eyes of their own public. And that at some point could create a crisis. Just a decade and a half ago, when we had the Arab Spring, or the Awakening, as some call it, no one thought, or very few people thought, that there would be this uproar across North Africa and West Asia. Some young man burned himself alive in a city in Tunisia over a local grievance, and then the government collapsed, and then the government in Egypt collapsed, and then you had revolution and dirty wars, and you had then the Americans destroying Libya, and the Americans and others destroying Syria, and the whole region was in uproar. Today, it's much worse. The anger is much greater, and the economic situation is deteriorating, just as it is in much of the world, just as it is in the West. But the West will continue to push this policy, even though this danger lies ahead for them. And the fact is, Sabrina, that Israel is not an asset for the West. Israel is a burden, and it's a liability. And because of Israel, they supported a genocide. They've destroyed their image across the world. And the financial costs aside, but the fact that no one any longer believes in the free world or the civilized world and that sort of nonsense, you can't put a number on that the damage. So the economic damage in Ukraine because of Ukraine is beyond what we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq. And Trump himself, it was said it costed them $8 trillion. I would imagine that Ukraine was far worse than $8 trillion if they calculate the direct and indirect costs. But the damage that has been done to the West because of their unconditional support for ethno-supremacism in Palestine, it cannot be calculated. But they'll continue to push down this path, and these regimes will continue to be unpopular. And somewhere along the road, it's more than possible that one of these regimes will start to wobble. And if they do, then I think the whole American camp, it will be in danger, especially Sabrina, because the West is declining. They don't have the power that they used to control the situation. I'm not saying the United States has no power at all, but relatively speaking, it is on the decline, and its decline is pretty rapid. You see already how France is leaving Africa. Why? They've been stealing from Africa since before you and I were born, before our parents were born. But of course, I'm much older than you, so it goes back further in my case. But now they're being forced out. Why? Because they don't have the ability to maintain that sort of domination that they did in the past. The power is shifting away from the West. And that does not bode well for the Israeli regime, and that does not bode well for the American camp in the Arab world and in West Asia and North Africa in general.
Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. And happy Nowruz. It's the Iranian New Year tomorrow. It's the first day of spring. Roughly 10 countries celebrate the new year. And so happy Nowruz to all of your audience and you as well.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.